His fingers brushed her cheek, a touch softer than anything she had ever known, and for a heartbeat, she dared to hope. But then she saw it, the creeping gray that started at his fingertips, the slow, horrifying transformation into stone. Her scream was a silent one, trapped in a throat tight with a lifetime of sorrow. This was her curse, her inescapable fate. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The Gloomwood Forest did not live, it endured. It was a place of unnatural quiet, where the rustle of leaves sounded like a sigh and the snap of a twig echoed like a breaking bone. Here, in a small cottage nestled amongst the ancient, brooding trees, lived Cassandra Vale. Her home was a pocket of lonely order in a world of tangled roots and suffocating moss. The air inside was thick with the scent of dried herbs and damp earth, a fragrance that clung to her like a second skin. Outside, she tended to a garden unlike any other. It was not a place of vibrant life, but a gallery of exquisite, heartbreaking stillness. A rabbit, its nose forever twitching towards a phantom clover, sat perfectly preserved in granite. A fox, its head cocked with an eternally curious expression, was frozen mid-stride. A small songbird, its beak open as if to release a note that would never come, perched on a stone branch. These were not sculptures carved by a master's hand. They were the casualties of her curse, small creatures that had dared to show her affection and had paid the ultimate price. Every morning, she traced their perfect, unmoving forms with her fingertips, a daily penance, a painful reminder of the poison she carried within her. Her days were a ritual of solitude. She foraged for roots and berries, her movements practiced and silent, a ghost gliding through the muted greens and browns of the forest. Her senses were honed to a razor's edge, not for any danger that might befall her, but for the far greater danger of another human wandering too close. The curse was simple and absolute, a hateful magic woven into her bloodline. Anyone who felt love or even a flicker of genuine affection for her would turn to stone. So she kept her vigil, a lonely warden of her own poisoned existence. A deer once strayed too near her cottage, its large liquid eyes soft with an innocent curiosity. "Stay away," she had whispered, her voice a rusty croak from disuse. "Please, just stay away." The words were a prayer and a command, and the animal, sensing the profound sorrow that radiated from her, had thankfully bounded away. One afternoon, she found a traveler's glove on the narrow path that skirted the edge of her territory, a fine leather thing, still holding the faint warmth of its owner. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She dug a small hole with her bare hands, the damp soil cool against her skin, and buried the glove deep, erasing the trace of human presence as if it were a contagion. Loneliness was her most constant companion, an aching void that sat in her chest. At night she dreamed of things she could never have, the simple weight of a hand in hers, the sound of another's laughter mingling with her own, a conversation that wasn't just the echo of her own thoughts. Sometimes, she would stare at her reflection in the still, dark water of a forest pool. The woman who stared back was a stranger, a ghost defined only by what she lacked. She was beautiful, with eyes the color of moss after a rain and hair like spun moonlight, but it was a cruel joke. Her beauty was a flower blooming in a sealed glass jar, something that could only be admired from a distance, for to touch it was to invite destruction. She was a walking tragedy, a story told in whispers, and she had long ago accepted that her final chapter would be written alone. Miles away, where the world was still vibrant and alive, Alpha King Thane Rael rode at the head of his warriors. He was a king forged in battle and duty, his presence as commanding as the mountains that bordered his kingdom. Beside him rode Garrick, his second in command, a warrior whose loyalty was as unyielding as his grim expression. For weeks, they had been hunting a phantom, a monstrous wolf that left a trail of terror and death along the kingdom's borders. It slaughtered livestock, savaged patrols, and then vanished, its tracks fading into nothing as if it were made of smoke and shadow. The hunt had been a frustrating, bloody affair, a direct challenge to Thane's rule. Now, the trail had led them to the edge of the Gloomwood, a place the elders spoke of in hushed, fearful tones. His pack warriors were uneasy, their keen werewolf senses overwhelmed by the forest's oppressive aura, a suffocating blanket of silence and sorrow. The air grew cold, and the vibrant sounds of their own lands died behind them, swallowed by the dead quiet ahead. "Alpha," The trail ends here, Garrick said, his voice low. He gestured with his chin towards the wall of dark trees. The elders say this forest is cursed. No one who enters comes out the same. Thane dismounted, his powerful frame moving with a fluid grace. He knelt, examining the last visible track. It was enormous, larger than any wolf he had ever seen, and the air around it smelled faintly of ozone and decay. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the forbidding forest, his jaw tight with resolve. "Curses are stories told to frighten children, Garrick," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "A beast is killing my people. I will not stop until I have its head, whether it lives in a forest or a fairy tale." He felt the weight of his crown, a constant pressure on his brow. This phantom wolf was an affront, a direct challenge to his ability to protect his kingdom. His alpha instincts, usually so clear and sharp, were muddled here. This was no ordinary beast, and the mystery of it gnawed at him. He felt a strange pull towards the woods, a primal instinct he couldn't explain, a feeling that the answer to this bloody riddle lay somewhere in the shadows ahead. An unknown instinct, a whisper in his soul, urged him forward. "Wait here," he commanded Garrick and the others. "I will scout ahead alone." Before they could protest, he pushed past the first line of trees, plunging into the gloom. The forest seemed to resist him. Branches, like skeletal fingers, snagged at his clothes, and thick roots seemed to twist and rise from the ground to trip his feet. The silence was absolute, a heavy physical presence that pressed in on him from all sides. He pushed deeper, drawn by that inexplicable pull, until he stumbled into a clearing. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. A small, well-kept cottage stood in the center of the clearing, a plume of smoke rising from its chimney. But it was the garden that stunned him. A menagerie of stone animals, perfectly detailed, unnervingly lifelike. He recognized the artistry as something beyond human skill, something unnatural. And then he saw her. Her back was to him as she knelt, tending to the cold, silent forms. An aura of sadness surrounded her, a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical force, a wave of despair that washed over him and called to something primal and protective deep within his wolf's soul. It was a loneliness that mirrored a hidden part of himself, the isolation of a king who stood above all others. As if sensing his presence, she went still. Slowly, she rose and turned. The moment their eyes met was a silent thunderclap that shook the foundations of his world. Her eyes, wide and filled with a terror so pure it stole his breath, were the most beautiful things he had ever seen. For Thane, it was the fated mate bond, a concept he had understood intellectually but never experienced, snapping into place with the force of a physical blow. It was the feeling of finding a piece of his soul he never knew was missing, a sudden, absolute certainty that this woman, this creature of sorrow and shadow, was his. For Cassandra, it was pure, unadulterated horror. She saw not a man, but a victim, a powerful, magnetic, breathtakingly handsome man who was now in mortal danger simply by being in her presence. His gaze was intense, a mixture of shock, intrigue, and an immediate, inexplicable protectiveness that was more terrifying than any threat. "You should not be here," she said, her voice trembling but firm, the first words she had spoken to another soul in years. "Leave this place. It is not safe for you." Thane ignored her warning, his world narrowing to the sight of her. He took a step forward, his wolf senses screaming at him that she was not a threat, but something more, something vital. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "What is this place? It doesn't matter who I am," she insisted, backing away, her hand instinctively flying to her chest as if to physically guard her treacherous heart. "All that matters is that you leave, now, before it's too late." But it was already too late. Thane saw past her simple, worn clothes and her guarded, terrified expression. He saw the haunting beauty that she tried to hide, the deep well of pain in her eyes, and an inner strength that held her together against a sorrow that would have shattered a lesser person. He did not know her name, and he did not understand the danger she spoke of, but he knew, with a certainty that resonated in his very bones, that he would never leave her. He had spent his life protecting his kingdom, but in that instant, he knew he had found his queen. Her desperation was a wild, frantic thing, clawing its way up her throat. She gestured frantically towards her garden of sorrow, her hand shaking. "Did you see them?" she cried, her voice cracking under the strain of a lifetime of unshed tears. "This is what happens here. The forest, it claims everything, every living thing that feels anything at all. You will be next if you don't run." She pointed a trembling finger at the stone fox, its posture of playful curiosity now a grotesque mockery. "He was my friend. He would bring me berries. Now he is a warning you must heed." Thane's gaze followed her finger, but his eyes were not on the statue, they were on her. As an alpha, his senses were attuned to the subtle currents of truth and deception, and while he felt no lie in her words, he sensed a deeper, more complex secret coiled beneath her terror. She wasn't being deceptive about the danger. She was simply omitting the cause. He strode past her, his boots making no sound on the mossy ground, and knelt before the stone fox. The craftsmanship was impossible. Every strand of fur, every whisker, rendered with a detail that no sculptor could achieve. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold, unyielding stone of its ear. A tremor, faint but undeniable, shot up his arm. It was not a physical vibration, but a thrum of ancient, malevolent magic, a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature of the stone and everything to do with the dark power that saturated it. He felt the lingering echo of a life extinguished, of warmth and affection violently transformed into this cold, permanent stillness. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "The forest didn't do this," he said, his voice low and certain as he rose to his full height. "Magic did." Just as the words left his lips, a howl tore through the oppressive silence of the gloomwood. It was not the sound of any wolf he had ever heard. It was a chilling, multi-layered cry, filled with a ravenous hunger and an ancient, intelligent hatred. It was closer now, much closer than it had been when it had drawn him into these woods. Thane's head snapped up, his body instantly shifting into a state of high alert. His protective instincts, already stirred by Cassandra's presence, now flared into a raging inferno. The phantom beast he had been hunting was here, and this woman, his mate, was at the very heart of the danger. His focus shifted in an instant, the mystery of the curse paling in comparison to the immediate, physical threat that was closing in on them. He turned back to Cassandra, his eyes blazing with a new intensity. "And that wolf I'm hunting," he growled, the sound more alpha than man. "It's connected to this, isn't it? To you." It was an accusation, but it was also a question born of a desperate need to understand the vortex of danger he had just stepped into. He saw her flinch, a barely perceptible tightening of her shoulders, her eyes widening in fresh horror, and in that single, silent reaction, the connection was forged in his mind, as solid and undeniable as the stone statues at their feet. Her panic was a palpable thing now, a scent in the air that his wolf senses drank in. She had spent a lifetime perfecting her isolation, a fortress of solitude built brick by painful brick, and this man, this king, was tearing it down with his bare hands in a matter of minutes. Every moment he stayed, the invisible tendrils of the curse felt like they were tightening, a noose drawing ever closer around his neck. But for Thane, the howl of the beast cemented his decision. He saw her not as the source of the danger, but as its epicenter, and the mate bond screamed at him, a primal, undeniable command, to pull her from the heart of the storm. "I am not leaving," Thane declared, his voice ringing with the absolute authority of an Alpha King. "And you are not staying, you are coming with me." He took a step towards her, his intention clear and immovable. "That beast is my target, and you are now under my protection." The words struck Cassandra with the force of a physical blow. This was her worst nightmare given flesh and voice. "No!" she cried, stumbling backward. "You can't! My place is here. This is my prison, my fate. You will doom yourself." She turned and ran, a desperate, hopeless flight towards the imagined safety of her cottage. It was a foolish, instinctual act, the flight of a cornered animal, but it was all she had left. She didn't get more than 2 steps. He moved with a speed that was not entirely human, a blur of motion that closed the distance between them in a single heartbeat. His hand closed around her arm, his strength absolute, yet the touch itself was shockingly gentle. It was a hold of firm possession, not of violence. A jolt of forbidden electricity, hot and sharp, shot through Cassandra's entire body. It was the first time she had been held by a man. First time she had felt the warmth of another's skin against her own, without it immediately turning to cold, dead stone. A part of her that had been starved for a lifetime, a part she had thought long dead, awakened with a treacherous, spreading warmth. She hated it. She hated the feeling, hated the hope it sparked, because she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this warmth was merely the precursor to his death. As they stood there, locked in a tableau of desperate refusal and unyielding resolve, the forest around them seemed to hold its breath. The moment was shattered by the sound of crashing undergrowth. Garrick and two other warriors burst into the clearing, their swords drawn, their faces grim. They had been drawn by the phantom wolf's howl, ready for a battle, but they stopped dead at the sight before them. Their Alpha King, their leader who stood alone and unchallenged, was holding a strange, wild-eyed woman in a clearing filled with the most unnervingly lifelike stone animals they had ever seen. "Alpha Thane?" Garrick asked, his voice tight with caution as he took a half-step forward. His suspicious eyes flickered from Thane to Cassandra, lingering on her with open distrust. "Is everything all right?" Thane did not release his grip on Cassandra. He didn't even look at his men. His gaze was locked on her, his eyes burning with a fire she could not comprehend. "My doom would be leaving you here to face that beast alone," he said, his voice low and resolute, meant for her ears only. He was answering her plea, not Garrick's question. "You are coming with me." He paused, and the next words he spoke sealed their fates together, a vow spoken into the heart of a cursed wood. "I am your king, and I am your mate. You will be safe with me." The word, mate, hung in the air between them, a concept so foreign and impossible to Cassandra that she could only stare at him, her terror momentarily eclipsed by sheer, unadulterated shock. The arrival of the warriors had transformed her private horror into a public humiliation. She felt like a trapped animal, exposed under the judging eyes of these hard-faced men, her strange, cursed life laid bare for all to see. For Thane, however, the moment he touched her, the mate bond had solidified from a feeling into an absolute, unshakable truth. There were no more questions, no more doubts. She was his. The only path forward was with her by his side, and the entire world would simply have to bend to that reality. Without another word, Thane moved. He swept Cassandra off her feet, his strength effortless. She gave a small, startled cry, her hands flying to his shoulders in a purely reflexive action. The contact, skin on cloth, sent another series of tremors through her. He strode to his massive warhorse and lifted her onto its back, settling her in front of him before swinging up into the saddle behind her. The proximity was an exquisite agony. She was caged in, her back pressed against the solid wall of his chest, his powerful thighs bracketing hers, one strong arm wrapping around her waist to hold her securely in place. It was a gesture of both possession and protection, but to Cassandra, it felt only like the closing of a trap. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the scent of leather and pine, and something else, something uniquely him, a scent that was both wild and civilized. It was overwhelming. She remained rigid, a statue of misery in his arms, her hands clenched into tight fists in her lap. He spurred the horse forward, and they rode out of the clearing, leaving her small cottage and her garden of stone friends behind. As they passed the edge of the gloomwood, the oppressive silence of the forest seemed to press in on them one last time, a final, possessive attempt to keep her within its cursed borders. Then they were through, bursting into the open air and the fading light of dusk. The sudden expanse of the sky, the rush of the wind, the chatter of the warriors falling into formation behind them. It was a sensory overload that made her head spin. After years of silence and solitude, the world felt too loud, too bright, too fast. The journey to the castle was a torment of tension. The pack warriors kept a respectful distance, but she could feel their eyes on her, could hear the low murmur of their whispers. She was an anomaly, a disruption to their ordered world, a strange woman plucked from a cursed forest by their king. Garrick rode close beside Thane, his face a thundercloud of disapproval. His silence was louder than any argument, a palpable force of judgment directed at her very presence. Cassandra refused to look at Thane, refused to let him see the turmoil in her eyes. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, on the distant mountains turning purple in the twilight, trying to memorize the path, to burn the route back to her prison into her mind. It was a fool's hope, but it was the only one she had. "Thane, what are you thinking?" Garrick finally growled, his voice low enough to not carry to the other men. "You bring a stranger from a cursed wood into the heart of the kingdom? The pack will not understand. They will see her as a threat." Thane's arm tightened around Cassandra's waist, a silent, possessive answer before he even spoke. "They will understand that their king does not abandon his mate," he replied, his voice dangerously quiet, laced with an authority that tolerated no dissent. "She is under my protection. That is all they need to know." He shifted his gaze to his second in command, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Spread the word. Garrick. Any disrespect shown to her will be taken as disrespect to me." Garrick fell silent, his jaw tight, but he offered no further argument. The command had been given. Thane's internal conflict was a quiet storm beneath his calm exterior. He could feel her terror, a constant, trembling vibration against his chest, and it pained him more than any physical wound. He wanted to soothe her, to explain the sacred, unbreakable bond he felt, to tell her that she was not a curse but a blessing, the other half of his soul. But he knew she was not ready to hear it. Her fear was a wall of ice around her heart, and he knew he could not melt it with words alone. He also felt the weight of his pack's suspicion, a political turmoil brewing before they even reached the castle gates. But the certainty of the bond, the absolute rightness of holding her in his arms, overrode every other concern. He held her a little tighter, a silent promise of safety that, for her, could only be interpreted as the bars of a beautiful, inescapable cage. The castle rose from the earth like a fang of white marble, a structure of impossible grace and intimidating strength. Towers soared into the twilight sky, their peaks seeming to scrape the underbellies of the first stars. As they passed through the colossal main gates, the clatter of the horses' hooves on stone echoed like thunder, a sound that made Cassandra flinch. Along the walls and archways, torches burned with a strange silver-blue light, casting no smoke and radiating a clean, sterile heat. She had heard whispers of this on the rare occasions a traveler's path skirted her woods, tales of the Alpha King's fortress, warded by forbidden fire that repelled all dark magic. The irony was a bitter acid in her throat. She was the darkest magic of all, and she was being carried right through its front door. The bustling life of the castle courtyard came to a sudden, screeching halt. Servants carrying laundry baskets froze, mid-step, stable hands, grooming horses went still, and nobles strolling along the battlements stopped their conversations, their mouths falling open. A wave of silence washed over the courtyard, followed by a ripple of frantic, excited whispers. They stared as their king, a figure of legend and power, rode in not with the head of a monster, but with a disheveled, wild-looking woman held tight against him. She felt their hundreds of eyes on her, a physical weight of judgment and suspicion, and she shrank against Thane's chest, a traitorous instinct seeking shelter with the very source of her predicament. Thane ignored them all. His world had narrowed to the trembling woman in his arms and the grim purpose that now drove him. He swung down from his horse and, before she could even think to resist, lifted her into his arms. He carried her through the great hall, his boots echoing on the polished marble floors. He moved with a predator's grace, his expression a mask of stone that dared anyone to speak a word. Cassandra buried her face in his shoulder, unable to bear the sea of staring faces, the rustle of silk and velvet as nobles turned to track their progress. He was taking her to a luxurious suite of rooms in the heart of the royal wing. The doors were carved from pale wood, and when he pushed them open, she was met with a scene of such opulent comfort that it made her feel sick. A fire crackled in a marble hearth. The four-poster bed was draped in silks the color of cream, and a plush fur rug was spread across the floor. It was a paradise designed to be a prison. He set her down gently, his hands lingering on her arms for a moment. "You will have everything you need," he said, his voice softer now that they were alone. "Food, clothes, comfort. No harm will come to you here." Cassandra stared at the room, at the gilded furniture and crystal decanters, and saw only the beautiful, intricate details of a cage. The soft fabrics felt like spiderwebs, designed to ensnare her. The rich food she could smell from a nearby table tasted like ash in her mouth before she even tried it. "This is a prison," she whispered, her voice hollow. "A beautiful prison, but it won't stop the curse. It follows me. It's part of me." She immediately turned her back on him, walking on unsteady legs to the tall, arched window. Her fingers traced the cold glass as she looked down at the courtyard, her mind already searching for an escape route, for any path that would lead her away from him, away from the doom she was sure to bring upon him. Thane watched her, a deep frustration churning in his gut. He had offered her a sanctuary, the best of all he had, and she looked at it with the same horror she had shown the stone statues. He was a king, an alpha, a provider and protector, yet every instinct he followed to keep her safe only seemed to terrify her more. He could not understand the depth of her fear, a fear so profound it rejected safety, a sorrow so deep it chose a lonely hell over a shared heaven. His mind churning, Thane sought the one person in the castle who dealt not in steel and politics, but in whispers and portents. He found Alara, the pack's elderly seer and historian, in her chambers at the top of the library tower. The room was a chaotic sanctuary of knowledge, smelling of old parchment, beeswax, and dried herbs, a scent that was a faint, scholarly echo of Cassandra's own cottage. Ancient scrolls were stacked high on every surface, celestial charts were pinned to the walls, and strange, intricate artifacts of silver and bone rested on velvet cloths. Alara sat in a high-backed chair, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes holding the deep, patient wisdom of centuries. She looked up as Thane entered, her gaze missing nothing. He did not sit, but paced before her fireplace, the silver-blue flames casting dancing shadows on his troubled face. He told her everything, his voice a low, urgent rumble. He described the gloomwood, the oppressive sorrow that clung to the very air, the impossible, heartbreaking detail of the stone animals, and the unshakable, soul-deep certainty of the mate bond that had seized him the moment he saw Cassandra. He spoke of the phantom wolf and the unnatural magic he had felt, but he carefully avoided the word curse, as if refusing to give the thing a name would rob it of its power. Alara listened without interruption, her gnarled fingers steepled before her lips. She was one of the few left who remembered the old tales, the histories that had faded into legend, the whispers of a witch's vengeance enacted upon a specific bloodline centuries ago. The details Thane provided were not just clues, they were confirmations. The sorrow, the stone, the forest, it was all part of a story she had prayed was just that, a story. When he finished, the silence in the room was heavy with unspoken dread. "The bond is a powerful thing, Alpha King," she said finally, her voice a dry rustle like turning pages. "It is the sacred law of our people, the thread that weaves our pact together. But some magic is older than our laws." She rose slowly, her joints creaking, and shuffled to a bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines of ancient, leather-bound tomes. "You have stumbled into a wound left by a forgotten war, a poison brewed from a heart broken so long ago, its owner is not even dust. Be cautious." She turned to face him, her ancient eyes filled with a profound gravity. "The heart is a fragile thing, and some poisons are designed specifically to break it. The mate bond calls for you to love her, but this magic may use that very love as the dagger it slips between your ribs." Her words, calm and measured, planted a seed of genuine fear in Thane's heart. He had faced down armies and beasts, his own mortality a familiar risk, but this was different. For the first time, he considered that his own feelings, the most powerful and certain emotion he had ever known, could be the very weapon that would destroy him. He had projected nothing but absolute confidence, but Alara's wisdom had shown him the terrifying shape of the battlefield he was truly on. She asked for time to consult the oldest records, and he granted it, leaving her chambers with a new, cold weight in his soul. That evening, Thane insisted Cassandra join him for dinner. He would not allow her to hide, would not allow this fear to rule his castle. A servant girl had brought a selection of dresses, and Cassandra had chosen the simplest, a gown of dark green velvet that shimmered like moss in the torchlight. When she entered the great hall, a hush fell over the assembled nobles. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but she moved with the terrified grace of a deer, her eyes wide and constantly scanning the room, looking for threats where there were none. She was utterly, painfully out of place. The dinner was an exercise in exquisite tension. The table was laden with roasted meats, sweet fruits, and spiced wines, a feast that could feed her for a year, but she could not bring herself to eat. Thane tried to draw her out, his voice a low murmur intended only for her. "The castle gardens are said to be beautiful," he offered, trying to find some common ground. "Perhaps you would like to see them tomorrow." "I prefer to stay inside," she replied, her voice flat and cold, her gaze fixed on a tapestry depicting a long, dead battle. She was building a wall, brick by icy brick, trying to be as cold and unlovable as possible. It was, she believed, the only way to save him. If he could not feel affection for her, the curse would have no power. The tension was broken by a small commotion. A young servant boy, no more than 16, was approaching their table with a pitcher of wine. He was staring at Cassandra, his mouth slightly agape, his young face a picture of awestruck admiration. His distraction was his undoing. He stumbled, and a splash of dark red wine arced through the air, landing on the pristine white linen of the tablecloth near Cassandra's plate. The boy flushed crimson, his eyes wide with panic. "Forgive me, my lady," he stammered, rushing forward with a cloth. "Your beauty, it was distracting. It was an innocent, foolish compliment, the kind of thing a boy his age might say. But to the curse, it was an invitation." As he reached to clean the spill, his hand, the one holding the cloth, seemed to stutter in its movement. For a single, horrifying second, the skin of his fingers and the back of his hand paled, losing their warmth and color, taking on the dull, lifeless texture of pale gray stone. The knuckles stiffened, the joints freezing in place. Cassandra saw it. A strangled gasp tore from her throat, and she shoved her chair back with such force that it screeched across the marble floor and toppled over. The violent sound shattered the boy's brief, infatuated trance. His admiration was instantly replaced by a surge of pure terror at the Alpha King's certain anger. As the new emotion flooded him, the color rushed back into his hand. He shook it, a confused expression on his face, as if it had simply gone numb for a moment. The entire incident had lasted no more than 3 seconds. No one else in the hall, their attention drawn only by the sound of the falling chair, had seen the subtle, horrifying transformation. But Thane, his senses honed and his entire focus locked on Cassandra, had seen it all. He had seen the flicker of gray, the unnatural stiffness, the momentary cessation of life. The curse was not a story. It was not a memory from a dead forest. It was here, in his hall, at his table, a real and active threat. For Cassandra, it was a moment of horrifying validation. A fresh wave of self-hatred, so powerful it made her dizzy, washed over her. She was a plague, a walking disaster, and her pathetic attempt to protect him by being cold had been utterly useless. Her very presence was a poison. "You see?" she whispered, her voice shaking with a renewed and sharpened terror as she stared at the confused boy being led away by a steward. "You see what happens? It's starting already. Even a moment, a flicker of admiration, is enough to invite ruin." She looked at Thane then, her eyes pleading, begging him to understand, to finally be afraid of her. And for the first time, she saw not just resolve in his eyes, but the cold, hard glint of dawning horror. The threat was no longer an abstract concept. He had witnessed its power with his own eyes, and it was aimed directly at his heart. The incident at dinner had shattered the fragile peace of the castle. It had dragged the curse from the realm of folklore and memory into the stark, undeniable present. Shaken, Alara retreated to the library tower, the scent of old parchment and beeswax a familiar comfort in a world suddenly thrown off its axis. The research that had been methodical now became frantic. The king's heart was on the line, and with it, the stability of the entire pack. She worked through the night, her old hands, surprisingly steady, turning brittle pages and unrolling ancient scrolls. The answer was not in the recorded histories or the lineage charts. This was something deeper, something hidden. Following an instinct born from centuries of her own bloodline's wisdom, She found herself staring at a section of wall lined with the personal chronicles of former alphas. She ran her hand over the leather spines, feeling for an inconsistency, a whisper of something out of place. Her fingers snagged on the spine of a tome belonging to an alpha who had ruled 500 years prior. It was looser than the others. With a grunt of effort, she pulled, and the entire book came away, revealing not a space on a shelf, but a dark, hollow cavity behind it. A hidden compartment. Inside lay a single object, a small, iron-bound chest. It was cold to the touch, a deep, unnatural cold that seemed to drink the warmth from her fingers. With trembling hands, she lifted it out and placed it on a reading table. The lock was old but not complex. Using a thin silver letter opener, she worked the mechanism until it clicked open with a sound like a sigh. The chest contained the personal effects of that long-dead alpha, a few tarnished silver coins, a dried flower pressed between sheets of wax paper, and a book. It was a small volume, bound in dark leather that was unnervingly soft and supple, stitched with what looked like black sinew. There was no title. As Alara lifted it, a wave of profound grief and rage washed over her, an emotional residue so powerful it made her stumble back. This was a grimoire, a witch's personal book of spells, and it was saturated with her pain. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Alara opened the book. The script inside was spidery and sharp, written with an angry, slashing hand in ink the color of dried blood. The words themselves seemed to writhe on the page, filled with a hateful energy. She scanned the text, her knowledge of ancient dialects allowing her to decipher the archaic tongue, and then she found it. The story of a witch named Lyra. Lyra had been a woman of immense power, living on the fringes of the kingdom, her heart given to one of Thane's ancestors, a powerful alpha named Cael. But Cael was already mated, his heart and soul bound to another. He had pitied Lyra, had been kind to her, but he could not return her obsessive love. That kindness, in the face of her unrequited passion, had curdled into a venomous hatred. In her grief and rage, she had not cursed the alpha who had rejected her, but the woman he had chosen, and all the women of her bloodline to come. Alara read the words of the curse aloud, her voice a horrified whisper in the dusty air. If a man of true heart cannot be mine, then no woman of this line will ever know a man's love. Let their affection be a tomb, their love a stone grave. The words hung in the chamber, a poison lingering for half a millennium. This was the source of Cassandra's agony, not a random affliction, but a targeted, hateful legacy. Alara felt a surge of pity for the girl, for the generations of women who had suffered under this vile magic. She read on, her hope dwindling with every hateful verse, until she found a new passage, written in a slightly different hand, as if an addendum had been added later. It was a prophecy, a counterspell. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The curse, it said, could be broken. When a true mate, an alpha of alphas, claims his love under the light of the blood moon, sealing it with a kiss that defies fate itself. Alara's eyes darted to the celestial charts pinned to her wall, her mind racing. The blood moon, the rare, powerful lunar eclipse that amplified all magic, both light and dark. It was in 3 days. The discovery was a double-edged sword. It offered a sliver of hope, a potential path to victory, but it was a path that ran along a razor's edge. To attempt the counter, spell under the blood moon meant the curse would be at its absolute zenith, its power magnified to a terrifying degree. The phrase, "a kiss that defies fate," sounded less like a solution and more like a beautiful, poetic suicide. Clutching the grimoire to her chest as if it were both a venomous snake and a holy relic, she hurried from the library, the weight of history and a perilous future heavy on her shoulders. Meanwhile, Thane, refusing to let the fear that had taken root in his soul rule him, decided on a different approach. The incident with the servant boy had proven that proximity and power were not enough. He could not command the curse away, and he could not force Cassandra to accept his protection. He needed to build a bridge to her, not just surround her with walls. He found her in her room, huddled by the window, a small, forlorn figure lost in the vastness of the silken draperies. She looked like a captured forest spirit, slowly fading in the gilded cage he had built for her. Instead of demanding she join him, he approached slowly, his footsteps soft on the rug. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle, stripped of its usual alpha command. "Walk with me," he said. It was not an order, but an invitation. She tensed, ready to refuse, but something in his tone, a quiet sincerity she had not heard before, made her hesitate. "Not in the main gardens," he added quickly, sensing her reluctance. "There is a private place, a sanctuary. No one will see us." She stared at him, her green eyes searching his for any sign of a trap. She found none, only a weariness that mirrored her own, and a deep, abiding loneliness. Hesitantly, she nodded. He led her through a series of quiet corridors to a small, unassuming wooden door. He opened it, and they stepped out into a walled garden she had not known existed. It was a place of quiet magic. There were no silver-blue torches here, only the soft, silvery light of the moon. The air was fragrant with the scent of night, blooming jasmine and damp earth. A small fountain murmured in the center, its gentle splashing the only sound. It was a neutral space, a bubble of peace in the tense, watchful castle. Thane did not press her with questions or fill the silence with demands. Instead, he began to talk, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the quiet dark. He spoke of his own life, of a childhood spent learning the sword and the politics of the court, of the immense pressure he had felt when his father died and the crown was placed upon his head. He showed her a moment of vulnerability, a glimpse of the man beneath the king. "My father used to bring me here," he said, his gaze distant as he looked at the fountain. "He said a king who doesn't know the stars will never understand the vastness of his kingdom." A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I think he just wanted a moment of peace, away from the council and their endless arguments." He pointed up at the sky, a brilliant tapestry of diamond dust against black velvet. "That is the great wolf," he said, tracing the shape of a constellation with his finger. "Our legends say he was the first of our kind, and that when he died, the moon goddess placed him in the sky to watch over his children." He told her the pack's legends, the stories of heroes and monsters, of love and loss, sharing his world with her, piece by precious piece. Cassandra remained silent for a long time, but she was listening. She watched him, saw the way the moonlight softened the hard lines of his face, saw the flicker of old grief in his eyes when he spoke of his father. She was seeing not just an Alpha King, but a man burdened by duty, a man who understood loneliness. A tiny, fragile connection began to form between them, born not of the fiery, demanding mate bond, but of a shared moment of quiet humanity. The garden was a sanctuary, a temporary truce, and in its gentle embrace, a tiny part of the ice around Cassandra's heart began to thaw. She saw his loneliness, and it was a perfect reflection of her own. The feeling was terrifying, a dangerous, treacherous warmth, but it was also undeniably sweet. "In my forest," she said, her voice so soft it was almost carried away by the breeze, "you can't see the stars. The trees are too thick." It was the first piece of personal information she had ever volunteered, the first time she had spoken of her life without being prompted by fear. It was a small offering, a single, perfect leaf extended across a vast chasm. But Thane received it like the most precious of gifts. He turned to her, a genuine smile lighting up his face, and for a moment, just a moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous, treacherous emotion that she had long ago buried. The fragile piece of the moment was destined to be shattered. She stood in the corridor, her ancient form silhouetted against a distant torch, the dark leather-bound grimoire clutched in her hands like a death sentence. The seer's eyes were filled with a terrible urgency, and the peaceful atmosphere of the garden evaporated like morning mist. Alara wasted no time with pleasantries. She looked from Thane's newfound hope to Cassandra's fragile calm, and her heart ached for the blow she was about to deliver. She revealed everything. She spoke of the witch Lyra, of her scorned love for Thane's ancestor, and of the hateful, targeted vengeance she had woven into Cassandra's bloodline. She recited the words of the curse, and each word was a hammer blow against Cassandra's soul. The truth was a horror far worse than the random cruelty she had always imagined. This was not a sickness, not an accident of fate. It was a weapon, a hateful legacy passed down from mother to daughter for 500 years. She felt the crushing weight of generations of her ancestors' suffering, saw their faces in her mind, women who had lived and died in lonely silence, just as she had. The stone statues in her garden were no longer just her personal failures, they were the latest monuments in a long, tragic history of broken hearts and stolen love. The burden became a physical thing, a crushing weight that threatened to drive her to her knees. Thane's reaction was the polar opposite. As Cassandra sank into a fresh hell of inherited guilt, he seized upon the one part of Alara's discovery that mattered to him, the prophecy. He was a warrior, a king. He did not see risks, he saw challenges. He did not see prophecies, he saw battle plans. The blood moon was not a threat, it was a deadline. The kiss was not a suicidal gamble, it was the objective. His path, which had been clouded by uncertainty, was now crystal clear, illuminated by the promise of a final, decisive confrontation. "It was never your fault, child," Alara said gently, her heart going out to the devastated girl. "It is an inherited wound." But Cassandra barely heard her. She turned to Thane, her eyes wide with an anguish so profound it was terrifying to behold. "Don't you understand?" she pleaded, her voice cracking. "This is a death sentence. The blood moon will make the curse stronger than ever. It's not a solution, it's a trap. The witch wants you to try. She wants to watch you fail, to see your love turn you to stone right before my eyes." "It's not a trap," Thane countered, his voice blazing with a sudden, ferocious determination that seemed to suck all the air from the corridor. His eyes, glowing with an inner fire, locked onto hers. "It's a challenge, and it's one I will not back down from." He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, his certainty an unbreachable wall. "I will not let a long, dead witch dictate our fate. I will not let her hatred poison our future." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between them, not touching, but radiating a heat she could feel on her skin. "We will break this curse," he declared, his voice ringing with the absolute power of his alpha will. Together, the same information had sent them hurtling in opposite directions. Cassandra retreated further into the darkness of fear and despair, convinced of the utter hopelessness of their situation. Thane surged forward, armed with a renewed and terrible purpose, his alpha certainty burning away all doubt. The chasm between them, which had for a brief, sweet moment in the garden, seemed to shrink, now yawned wider and more perilous than ever, even as the threads of their fates became more tightly and perhaps fatally intertwined. The king's council chamber was a place of stone and shadows, dominated by a massive oak table polished to a dark mirror by centuries of weighty decisions. Silver, blue fire burned in a wide hearth, casting a cold, sterile light that did little to warm the grim faces of the werewolves assembled there. Thane stood at the head of the table, his hands braced on its surface, his knuckles white. He had convened his most trusted advisors, the grizzled alphas of his inner circle, along with Garrick and Alara. He announced his plan without preamble, his voice devoid of warmth, a flat statement of fact that echoed with absolute power. He would face the curse under the blood moon, he would perform the ritual, he would kiss his mate. The chamber erupted, voices were raised in protest, a cacophony of disbelief and alarm, but it was Garrick who silenced them all. He slammed his fist on the table, the sound cracking through the room like a breaking bone. His face was a mask of fury, his loyalty warring with a desperate, terrified love for his king. "This is madness, Thane," he roared, his voice raw with anguish. "You would sacrifice 1,000 years of our bloodline, the stability of this entire kingdom, for a cursed girl you've known for 2 days? The pack needs a king, not a martyr. This is a selfish, suicidal folly." Thane's gaze, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, snapped to his second in command. Before he could speak, Alara's quiet voice cut through the tension. "It is not folly, Garrick," she said, her ancient eyes moving from the furious warrior to the implacable king. "It is fate. The alpha is the heart of the pack. His strength is our strength. To deny the mate bond, to allow his other half to suffer in isolation, is to weaken the heart. It would be a slow poison, rotting the pack from the inside out. The kingdom's well-being is tied to the king's heart, and the king's heart has made its choice. Garrick opened his mouth to argue, but Thane raised a hand, and the room fell silent once more. He pushed away from the table, his movements slow and deliberate, radiating a dangerous calm. "She is not a cursed girl," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, each word a carefully aimed dart. "She is my mate, the future of this pack, and I am still your king, Garrick." He let the words hang in the air, a stark reminder of the hierarchy that governed their very existence. "You will follow my orders, or you will be removed from this council." Garrick paled, his fury draining away to be replaced by a grim, resentful acceptance. He gave a stiff, formal nod, his jaw tight. Thane turned his gaze to the rest of the council, his eyes sweeping over them, daring any other to challenge him. None did. His authority was absolute. "Prepare the obsidian spire," he commanded, his voice ringing with finality. "The highest tower, the ancient ritual site. The blood moon waits for no one." Cassandra had not meant to eavesdrop. She had been drawn from her room by a suffocating restlessness, a need to move, to do something other than wait for a doom she could not prevent. The voices from the council chamber, muffled but angry, had reached her down the long stone corridor. She had pressed herself into the shadows of a tapestry, her heart pounding, and had heard it all. She heard Garrick's words, "a cursed girl," and they echoed the deepest, darkest beliefs she held about herself. She heard him call Thane's plan madness, a sacrifice, and the guilt that had been her constant companion became a physical entity, a monster with claws that tore at her insides. She could not let this happen. She could not be the reason this strong, noble king threw his life away. She could not be his executioner. In that moment, a desperate, terrible resolve solidified in her heart. The only way to save him was to disappear. She fled back to her rooms, her mind racing. Her life in the forest, once a symbol of her suffering, now became her greatest asset. She knew the properties of every root and leaf. She crept into the small private garden Thane had shown her, the memory of their shared peace now a painful, bitter irony. Under the light of the rising moon, which already held a faint, sickly reddish tinge at its edges, she gathered what she needed, her hands moving with practiced speed. She found the pale, bell-shaped flowers of moon petal, a potent soporific, and the fuzzy leaves of whisper vine, which calmed the nerves and clouded the mind. Back in her room, she crushed the herbs between two stones, the familiar earthy scent filling the air. She mixed the resulting paste with the dregs of wine left on her dinner tray, creating a powerful sleeping draught. Her hands did not tremble. Her purpose was too clear, too absolute for fear. When the guards brought her evening meal, she offered them the wine, a gesture of thanks, her face a mask of calm she did not feel. They drank it gratefully, unaware of the betrayal in her smile. She waited an hour, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, until she was sure they were deep in a drugged slumber. Then she moved. She was a ghost in the marble halls, a shadow flitting through the cold, silver-blue light of the warding torches. The castle, once a gilded cage, was now a labyrinth she had to navigate to regain her freedom, the freedom to be miserable and alone, but to know that Thane was alive. Her goal was the Gloomwood, her prison, her only true sanctuary. As she crept down a dark servants' corridor, a low growl echoed in the silence. It was not a sound that came from the hallway. It was a sound that bloomed inside her own mind, a psychic manifestation of the curse's will. The phantom wolf was hunting. Its power was growing as the blood moon neared, the ancient magic stirring, hungry and aware. She froze, pressing herself into a shallow alcove, her breath catching in her throat. The growl faded, leaving behind a chilling sense of being watched, of a malevolent intelligence waiting for its moment. Shaking, she forced herself to move on. Before she had left her room, she had taken a piece of parchment and a charcoal stick. With trembling fingers, she had written a simple, heartbreaking plea. "Forgive me. It was the only way to save you." She left the note on the pillow of the bed she had never felt she deserved. A final, silent apology for the love she was cursed to inspire and fated to destroy. The bond was a living thing, a cord of light and shadow that tied his soul to hers. Thane felt it the moment her panic spiked into desperate action. It was a sharp, violent wrench in his gut, a psychic scream of flight and fear that was not his own. He was in his chambers, staring out at the reddening moon, his mind consumed with the coming battle, when her terror flooded his senses. He knew, with an instinct that bypassed thought and reason, exactly what she was doing. She was running. The realization sent a surge of adrenaline through him, a feeling far more potent than any battle rage. He moved, a blur of controlled fury, his own instincts screaming at him to find her, to stop her, to chain her to his side if he must. He did not bother with the main halls. He knew she would be smarter than that. He took the back ways, his senses, heightened by the Alpha's power and his connection to her, guiding him through the castle's labyrinthine passages. He found her in the main courtyard, a small, cloaked figure darting through the deep shadows cast by the keep. She was heading for a postern gate, a small, rarely used exit in the outer wall, her escape to the wilderness and her lonely death just moments away. He intercepted her with a predator's silence, stepping from behind a stone buttress to block her path. She gasped, stumbling back, her face a pale oval of shock and despair in the crimson-tinged moonlight. The confrontation was not a clash of wills, it was an explosion of raw, desperate emotion. "Let me go," she cried, tears she could no longer contain streaming down her face, tracing paths of silver through the grime on her cheeks. "Please, Thane, I am begging you. It is my curse, my burden to bear. I will not be your executioner. I will not watch you turn to stone because of me." "No," he growled, the word a raw, guttural sound torn from the depths of his soul. He refused. He grabbed her arms, his grip firm but not painful, anchoring her in place. He would not let her run toward her own destruction to save him from his. "Your burden is my burden now," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could not name, a feeling so vast and powerful it threatened to consume him. "Your fate is my fate. Did you think I could rule a kingdom, live another day, knowing you were out there, alone and suffering? Your forest is not your prison, Cassandra." He pulled her closer, forcing her to look at him, to see the truth in his blazing eyes. "A life without your mate, that is the only prison. I will not live in it, and I will not let you." He poured all of his devotion, all of his certainty, all of the soul, shaking truth of the mate bond into his gaze. He could not say the word, for fear the curse would hear it as an invitation, but he made sure she felt it, a declaration of war against her fate, against the witch, against the very stars if need be. He pulled her into a fierce, desperate embrace, crushing her against his chest. For a moment, she fought him, her small fists beating uselessly against the hard muscle of his torso, her body rigid with resistance. She struggled with the last of her strength, a wild animal caught in a trap it could not comprehend. And then, something inside her broke. A sob, a great, shuddering sound of utter defeat and overwhelming sorrow, tore from her throat. Her fight vanished, draining out of her like sand from a broken glass. She went limp in his arms, collapsing against his chest, her sobs muffled by the thick fabric of his tunic. It was a moment of complete and total surrender. She had no more fight left. She had tried to be cold, she had tried to run, she had tried everything she could to push him away, to save him from herself. And he was still there, holding her, refusing to let go, his arms a cage of unyielding protection. For the first time, in the terrifying blood-red glow of the approaching moon, she stopped fighting her fate and allowed herself to believe, just for a heartbeat, that they might actually face it together. Thane led her upward, his hand a warm, steady presence on the small of her back, guiding her away from the courtyard and into the heart of the keep. They climbed a winding staircase, spiraling up through the core of the highest tower, a passage so ancient the stone steps were worn into smooth, shallow bowls in the center. The air grew thinner, colder, and it seemed to vibrate with a strange, palpable energy that made the hairs on Cassandra's arms stand on end. Her surrender in the courtyard had not been a surrender to him, but to the inevitable. The fight had drained out of her, leaving behind a fragile, terrifying calm. She had tried to run, and he had refused to let her go. Now, there was only one path left, and it led up. They emerged onto the obsidian spire, an open-air observatory at the very peak of the castle, a perfect circle of black, polished stone that seemed to drink the light. There was no roof, only the vast, star-dusted expanse of the night sky, dominated by the moon. It was huge, swollen, and bathed in a sickening, crimson light, a bleeding wound in the heavens that painted the entire tower in shades of blood and rust. In the center of the circle, Alara stood, her eyes closed, her voice a low, monotonous hum as she chanted a protective word in the old tongue, her words weaving a fragile shield of silver energy in the air. At the base of the tower, far below, Cassandra could just make out the glint of armor. Garrick and the elite guard stood vigil, a silent, grim line of defense. She saw Garrick's face, turned upward, a mask of grim, resentful loyalty. He did not agree with this path, but he would defend his king to the death, a final, bitter act of love and duty. The air was thick with power, the amplified magic of the blood moon pressing down like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. The curse was no longer a whisper in her blood, it was a living presence, a suffocating blanket of ancient hatred that coiled in the air around them. Thane turned to her, his own face pale and taut in the eerie light. He took her hands in his grip firm and warm. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice low and steady, a rock in the swirling sea of magic. "Look at me, only me." Cassandra met his gaze. His eyes, usually the color of warm earth, seemed to glow with a golden light of their own, a reflection of the alpha wolf within. The terror was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a fragile crystalline resolve. She had spent her entire life running from this moment, from the possibility of love, from the certainty of the doom it would bring. Now, she was running toward it. She squeezed his hand, a small, answering pressure. "I'm with you," she whispered, and the words were not a promise of victory, but a simple statement of fact. Her fate was tied to his. They would face the end, whatever it may be, together. For the first time, they were a true, united front. Her fear had not vanished, but it was now secondary to her trust in him. His arrogance had been tempered into a focused, powerful determination. They stood together in the heart of the storm, waiting for the beast to strike. As the blood moon reached its absolute zenith, a perfect, blood-red circle hanging directly overhead, the magic of the curse reached its crescendo. The air crackled, and the shadows in the corners of the spire seemed to deepen, to writhe and coalesce. From that swirling vortex of darkness and rage, the phantom wolf emerged. It was no longer a phantom. It was a physical beast of shadow and fury, its form solidifying on the ancient stones. It was larger than any wolf, its fur the color of a starless midnight, its muscles coiling with an unnatural power. Its eyes were not the eyes of an animal. They were two burning embers of pure, intelligent malice, glowing with the witch Lyra's 500-year-old hatred. It let out a snarl that was not a sound, but a wave of pure despair that washed over the tower, and it lunged. Thane moved in the same instant, shoving Cassandra behind him with a protective roar. He drew the silver blade that had been strapped to his back, the metal gleaming with a cold, hungry light. He did not have time to fully shift, but the alpha wolf within him surged to the surface. His eyes blazed gold, his teeth elongated into sharp fangs, and his posture lowered into a predatory crouch. The fight was a whirlwind of brutal, desperate violence. Thane was a warrior at the peak of his power, his movements a blur of silver and fury, but the wolf was a creature of pure magic, impossibly fast and unnaturally strong. It was not bound by the laws of flesh and bone. The clash of silver on shadow sent sparks of crimson light flying into the air. The snarls of the Alpha King and the hate-fueled beast mingled in a terrifying duet. The wolf's claws, formed from solidified nightmare, raked across Thane's side, and he grunted in pain. They were not normal wounds. Where the claws touched, they left trails of dark, smoking energy that sizzled on his skin, a magical poison that attacked his very life force. Cassandra watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, a scream trapped in her throat. She was no longer a passive victim, a prize to be fought over. The sight of Thane bleeding for her, fighting for her, ignited a fire in her soul that burned away the last vestiges of her fear. Her love for him, a feeling she had suppressed and denied for what felt like a lifetime, now bloomed into a fierce protective rage. She would not let him die. Her eyes, wide and frantic, scanned the scene, not for an escape but for a weakness, for any way to help. She saw the crimson light of the blood moon pouring down, not just illuminating the tower, but feeding the beast. Lines of red energy flowed from the sky, anchoring themselves in the ancient ritual stones of the circle. And from those stones, the power flowed directly into the shadow wolf, constantly renewing its strength, making it invincible. Her love, which the curse had twisted into a weapon against her, had now given her the clarity to see the curse's own mechanism. "The stones!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the din of the battle. "Thane, it's using the stones! It's drawing power from them!" Her voice was the distraction the beast needed. It feinted, dodging Thane's silver blade, and slammed its massive shoulder into his chest. The impact was tremendous. Thane was thrown backward, the air driven from his lungs, his head cracking against the hard obsidian floor. His sword skittered across the stone, coming to rest just out of his reach. The shadow wolf loomed over him, its jaws dripping with a black, viscous ichor, its burning eyes fixed on his throat, ready for the final, killing blow. At that moment, with all hope seemingly lost, Cassandra acted. She did not hesitate, did not think. She ran forward, a desperate, selfless act of love, and placed her own body between the wounded king and the snarling beast. She stood before the monster, her arms spread wide as if to shield him, her face pale but resolute in the bloody moonlight. She faced the embodiment of her curse, and for a single, crucial second, the wolf hesitated. It saw the face of the bloodline it had been created to torment for eternity, the final descendant of its master's rival, and in its ancient, magical mind, a flicker of confusion warred with its insatiable hatred. That single second was all Thane needed. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his side and the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. He ignored his lost sword, ignored the beast, ignored everything but the woman who was willing to die for him. With a guttural cry, he surged forward and pulled Cassandra into his arms, spinning her around so his back was to the beast. He looked directly into her eyes, his own golden gaze filled with an unwavering, unconditional love that burned brighter than any star. The world fell away, the sound of the snarling wolf, the cold stone beneath their feet, the blood, red moon above, it all vanished. There was only her. "I love you, Cassandra Vale," he said, his voice raw and thick with emotion. He spoke the forbidden words, a clear and final declaration of war against the curse, and then he kissed her. The moment their lips touched, two things happened in a single, world-shattering instant. The curse, triggered by his spoken love and the physical act of affection, attacked with the full, amplified force of the blood moon. A wave of cold fire, the horrifying sensation of petrification, surged up Thane's arm where he held her, creeping visibly up his neck, the skin turning a dull, lifeless gray. He felt his life being extinguished, his warmth turning to cold, unfeeling stone. But at the exact same time, the kiss, the true mate's kiss, unleashed the full, cataclysmic power of their bond. A blinding, ecstatic nova of silver-blue light erupted from their point of contact, an explosion of pure, untainted magic that was the antithesis of the curse's hateful energy. It was the pain of death and the joy of creation, a universe of agony and ecstasy contained in a single, impossible heartbeat. The creeping gray stone met the exploding silver-blue light, and for a moment, they battled for his very soul. Then, the light, fueled by a love that had defied fate itself, consumed the darkness. The light faded, leaving a profound, ringing silence in its wake. The oppressive magical energy that had suffocated the tower was gone, replaced by the clean, crisp air of the autumn night. The blood moon's angry red glare had softened into the gentle, silvery glow of a normal moon. On the obsidian floor, there was no sign of the phantom wolf. It had been utterly vaporized, its ancient hatred erased from the world. In the center of the tower, Thane and Cassandra stood, still locked in their embrace. The wave of gray stone that had been climbing Thane's neck, a deathly collar of granite, had cracked like a fragile shell. As they watched, it crumbled into dust and fell away, revealing the warm, unmarked skin beneath. He was healed. He was whole. The curse was broken. They pulled apart slightly, both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other as they stared with wonder and overwhelming relief. Far away, in the heart of the gloomwood, a tremor ran through the silent, lonely forest. In Cassandra's forgotten garden, the stone rabbit's nose twitched. Cracks appeared across the surface of the stone fox, and the little bird on the branch trembled. Slowly, miraculously, the stone crumbled away like dry earth, revealing the living, breathing creatures beneath. The rabbit wiggled its nose and hopped away. The fox stretched, shook its bushy tail, and trotted off into the trees. The bird opened its beak and released a single, clear note of song, the first to be heard in the gloomwood in centuries, before taking flight into a forest that was no longer silent. On the tower, Cassandra raised a trembling hand and touched Thane's face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, as if to be sure he was real. You're real," she whispered, her voice filled with an awe so profound it was almost painful. Thane laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy and relief that echoed in the quiet night. "So are you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are real." He lowered his head and kissed her again, and this kiss was not one of desperation or defiance. It was a kiss of promise, of a new beginning, a gentle, lingering seal on a future that was finally their own. They stood together on the highest tower of the kingdom, looking out at the sleeping lands below, their love no longer a curse, but a beacon, a love written in the stars and won against all odds.